An hash, an hash. Hat squile eich tanoia, quite stanat quian quinshaman, sis quian sna, an hash and squallowin, an wanoxton squallowin titsits. Good day, friends and relatives. Just before we start, I want to acknowledge that, in the work we do, everybody's busy, they're thinking, they're writing, they're absorbing. And on the West Coast, we have different ways of making sure that the work gets recorded on another level, on a cultural level, because I think you're all cultural people, and I don't want you to think I don't think that. But we're asking a couple of amazing women, matriarchs in our community that do frontline work to be what we call community listeners. And before I start my my work of bringing you to the shoreline, because you're all out there in canoes and you look really good in these square canoes out there floating in the water. But my dear new friend, Becky, is going to come and give some tobacco to our community listeners. And if they could stand up when I say their names so Becky can find you. Delilah Gregg. Thank you. And Carol Martin. So we like to make sure that we do this so you can see who is being extra ears for you here and extra eyes. We thank you for your work. Hathsquile, Heichka, Chenquimentomiwit. It's very important, the work you do. Thank you, thank you. All right, I'm throwing the script out now. So that's what I do. I don't like scripts. Scripts are for the smart actors out there. I'm not very good at acting. So anyway, it makes my heart feel full to watch you all engaging in this slahashan, our feast. It's important to feed ourselves when we do hard work. Small group was here this morning. I welcomed them ashore. I just want to explain that the work I'm doing is not a tokenistic thing because I hear it from different sides in the community, but we are very cultural people doing important work for our communities. And what I'm doing is seeing you all, as I just said, in canoes, out in the water, floating around. And I'm seeing faces I want to come and hug. So I'm going to hug you. Oh, okay, there we go. All hugged. And I just want to let you know that I know you've traveled a long distance. When we do this work on the shoreline, we hear the stories from each individual person, but since we don't only have a few minutes, we don't have a few days, we are going to do this a little shorter. And I'm going to say, I know you've traveled a long ways. You're here to do work. I know you're coming ashore, and I know you're going to go home. So I want you all to travel safe and be safe while you're in the lands of the Squamish, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Hwamathuian people. And I hope that our ancestors guide you and your ancestors guide you to where you need to be and how you need to be and what you need to be. OCM. And I'm going to share a beautiful song to welcome you ashore and to digest that good food, to digest the good work. And I'm also going to let people know that throughout the afternoon, I'll be at the back with cedar for brushing down, or smudge, whatever people need. Come and see me. If you just need to sit and be near the medicines, that's okay too. OCM on Hoth. And I'm going to sing a song that we call the Siam Slolum. And it's the song we sang to our ancestors when the Iron Horse finally arrived here on these shorelines. And then we sent a bunch of leaders, not only from our community, but from communities around the now so-called colonial province of British Columbia. And I want to say this because our leaders from all these nations understood. They understood what that train was about. They understood what colonialism was, and they understood that there were people in their own house in another shore, and our people went on those trains across the land. They took a ship across the ocean. The royal family was terrified and took off thinking 2 weeks and the natives will go home. Well, I'm pretty sure it took them 3 months to get there. So after 2 weeks, they're not going. They won't even go until they're going to meet with those people. And when a month went by and the monarchy finally said, come and see us. And when our leaders went, what they said was, we're never giving up our lands. So when people talk about unceded so-called British Columbia, that started a long, long time ago, and we've never stopped saying it, and we never will. These lands are not for sale. They are stolen lands. And yeah, we want our land back. What can I say? I think we all do. So I think that's an important song, and it's an important tone to get you all going today. All right? All right. OCM. Oh, oh, che, ya, cha, ya. Oh, oh, che, ya, cha, ya. Whoa. Hey, hey, hey. Hey, ya, chaya. Oh, oh, che. Hey, ya, chaya. Oh, oh, che. Hey, ya, chaya. Whoa. Hey, 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 ya, chaya. Oh, oh, Jay. OCM. On a funny note, so my latest granddaughter, her name is Hope. So you can imagine she loves this song, and we have to sing just Hope through the whole song. So I had to reset my brain before singing it. It's like hope, 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 hope. Anyway, just a beautiful little story, and just to kind of warm your hearts. And I really hope that you enjoy your time in the lands of the Tsleil-Waututh, the Waumatquiem, and the Squamish people. We have different people every day coming. I'm from the Squamish and Stalo nations, and it lifts my heart to have you all in our homelands, OCM, and have a good feast. Oh.
Thank you so much for that. It was beautiful. One of the things that I think I am most grateful for is having the opportunity to be able to visit multiple different territories and learn the teachings of those territories, and have had the opportunity to meet and learn an incredible amount of things over the course of the time that I've been a member of NUICC and also the co-chair. And there's such richness in that wisdom and in that experience. And one of the things that I am most grateful for is having the opportunity to be able to learn and to meet new friends and to build the community much stronger. So I do a lot of work, and one of the things that I sense is that there's a lot of fear around what's going on and UNDRIP, and around the ideas, like C said, of land back. We want our land back. And there's a lot of fear around mainstream organizations and redefining the relationship. And what does this mean? What does UNDRIP mean? What does this mean for us? And because I work specifically with mainstream organizations addressing systemic racism, I'm an expert in systemic racism. There is a lot of fear, and it's as if we're in a relationship and we're getting a divorce and we're saying, yeah, we're separating and we're keeping the house and you got to leave. And I've also heard lots of folks say that this is a revolution. And we don't know what that means, right? As Damon reminded us, perhaps it is a revolution. We've never had a bloodshed revolution or a bloody revolution, right? And is that, what are we looking? What does this mean for us? But at the same time, we have an opportunity where groups of people are coming together, and there's richness and culture and wisdom and teachings from all of those different people. This is a renaissance, right? A revolution that happens as we learn and evolve. We're learning protocols, we're learning wisdom from nations who have been here and survived for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. And we have wisdom, and we have technology, and we have depth from all of the people and all of the cultures who come together. And I'm grateful to have the opportunity not only to be co-chair, but to be a part of the conversations as they move forward with all of the depth and all of the richness that we have. So I'm also grateful to have the opportunity at this point to invite the Honorable Joan Phillip to be able to have a conversation. So Joan, if you'd like to join me. The first question that I have is, when you reflect, when you look back, perhaps as a child growing up, how do you see the changes for Indigenous people over the course of that history? You care to share with us?
I never dreamed while growing up in the mud flats in North Van that I would be sitting here as a member of the Legislative Assembly. All through school and high school and growing up, I had my little arse kicked because of the racism. And the racism was more hidden, but it's resurfaced as a consequence of the Trumpism. So there's been changes, but not huge changes.
Do you sense a difference from when the time that you were young until the time that we now have had the introduction of things like the TRC?
Well, I can tell you, I'm, of course, a member of the Legislative Assembly for this constituency, Vancouver Mount-Pleasant. I got elected by the highest margin of any MLA in the entire history of the province. So I always say we have a very progressive constituency. Because we know that this government particularly, first of all, is the only jurisdiction in the country that has adopted United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And we've implemented or also passed an action plan. We were going to pass legislation with respect to changes to the Land Act. Well, I'm telling you, the opposition were setting their hair on fire. They were spreading all kinds of lies and innuendo about how horrible that would be. It would give us veto power and on and on and on. And I thought, don't they realize we invented consensus building? But the fact is that this territory, the settlers aren't going away. But we need to share in what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And there's no shortcuts to that. There needs to be legislation. We're still going to have to work on that same legislation. We haven't, it's just put on the back burner now, but we're all here to stay, and we have to work together. And that's what we're doing. But there's that element, the Trumps that are out there spreading lies and innuendo, and they want to keep BC, keep the Indians down in BC, even in spite of the fact that when we do well, everyone will do well. Crazy.
Thank you. That is a growing threat, yes. You were involved in the Red Power movement, which was an important Indigenous organization at a time when sovereignty and self-determination were at different places. Would you be able to speak to what those different places are at that time and what we're seeing today?
Ooh. I can tell you the Native Alliance for Red Power was born out of economic and racial oppression. And it's still alive and well today. And so what's changed in my mind is not where we're going, but how to get there. And I always tell people I've left the little Taliban years behind. So one of our elders said, it's like a pie that gets taken from you. We're going to get it back one slice at a time. And not only are we fighting for that equality, we're fighting for our place at the table because we're all here to stay. So are the courts. The courts since Garin, since Delgamuch, since the Haida decision, the Hanyakotin, the Chilcotin decision, all have said the same thing. We share this land and we have to share in how it's going to be used or not used. Okay.
So there is a risk, like reconciliation in the TRC and the application of the TRC calls to action. We have seen in reality that Truth and Reconciliation has not recognized or honored Indigenous people in the way that it was intended. And efforts often that we see are very performative and don't actually have the depth or the teeth to be able to create the spirit of reconciliation as it was intended.
Well, I can tell you, Canadians have elected Liberals and Conservatives over the last 139 years. And the only thing that's happened is the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. And I recall when Trudeau or Canada come up with that apology to Indigenous peoples. And our elders were really angry because they said, it's not enough to just say you're sorry. Where's the beef? You know, where is how are you going to make it right for us? Well, at least in British Columbia, we're making attempts to make it right. I know that the federal government under the Paul Martin government, they cut back welfare transfer payments to the provinces. And that's when Van der Zalm was the premier here, and he cut all the single people off welfare. And then again, the federal government chopped health transfer payments to the provinces from 6% to 3%, chopped it in half. Well, guess who suffers? It's us. And so we're having to play catch up with all that no support, or I refer to Trudeau as a serial liar, unfortunately, because he made so many promises to us, not just us, but Canadian, you know, voters, and turned his back on it. He made a promise to us for $10 million never materialized. And the next go around, here's another $10 million, never materialized. Like, where did it go? So probably big oil. But anyway, I'm just, yeah, so disappointed. There's so many things that we're up against as a province, trying to play catch up with all the bad faith, you know, on the part of Canada. And yeah, it's not going to be easy. There's so much more that could be done. I noticed that Canada come up with, I think, $2 billion for housing. Oh, I hope that materializes. I don't know.
So we're seeing a lot of the same responses that have not been effective consistently year after year, decade after decade after decade. We see mainstream organizations really becoming better caterpillars and never actually turning into butterflies that we hope that they do. We are also recognizing that there is a huge lack of grassroots or community accountability, and Indigenous people are generally almost always fall at the bottom of the scale in terms of being furthest away from opportunity. But yet we are still consistently excluded from mainstream power structures that are saying that our needs are a priority. And yet we consistently are not part effectively and appropriately culturally of those discussions, and are consistently excluded from decision-making tables in organizations, in municipalities, in all sectors of decisions that are affecting our lives, not only our lives, but our well-being. So my question to you would be, what would you say to communities who are organizing now with a shifting landscape of understanding UNDRIP, to be able to recognize that diversity is not enough, that we don't just want to be included into mainstream organizations that do not address our needs or our identity effectively?
You know, there's so much more that we can do. We have hundreds of service organizations in this constituency alone, and we need them to be talking to each other and coordinating those efforts. And we need to be more inclusive. Even with the development of the Land Act, those changes that we were going to make, we consulted everyone. We did everything right. The First Nations Leadership Council, and I know my husband is the president of the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, and he doesn't say anything, he doesn't do anything without a mandate from the chiefs, his constituents. And so he said, when that legislation got shelved, he was so upset, and he heard other chiefs saying, well, we could have done this or we could have done that. He said, no, we did everything right. And it was the opposition from BC United Party. Thank you. I was going to say liberals, but they don't exist anymore. And the conservatives that spread lies about the impact of that legislation. And so we put it on the back burner. It's going to go back to the public, and we're going to do another round of discussions. And yet it was such a great piece of legislation And I always say a rising tide floats all boats. So when we do well, everyone will do well. We can't leave anyone behind. And the unfortunate thing is we've got governments that keep feeding the top 1% and the poor keep getting poorer. And that is wrong.
In our own lands and territories, I will add. And yes, I agree with you, it is wrong. It leads me to the question actually that I did want to add, like colonial governments have been very, very effective at dividing Indigenous voices. I just actually ask you to speak about that for a second in your experience, and then I do have a follow-up question after that. I asked if Joan would be able to speak to the experience of how colonial governments have very effectively worked at dividing Indigenous voices. And that I have a follow-up question actually after her comments.
You know, when people talk about Indigenous peoples having been colonized, it's not having been colonized. We still are colonized. I was the land manager for Penticton Indian Band for 25 years, and I can tell you, reserve lands are not owned by us. It's owned by now His Majesty, set aside for our use and benefit. It's in the Indian Act. I had to follow the Indian Act. And for me to do anything on the reserve, I had to get His Majesty's signature on a document saying, okay, you can do this or that with your land. So we don't own it. Still colonized, still controlled. We just finished fighting with, I believe there was a court case that Cindy Blackstock brought forward because Quebec was objecting to the fact that we should have control over our children and families. We've always looked after our children and families. And the unfortunate thing is our children have become big business. My mother used to work in this building and she spent all her time in the courts keeping kids at home. Because the moment a child is apprehended, federal money comes zinging over into the provincial coffers. And so we want to keep children at home. I was also on a president of the Native Police Liaison Committee for Vancouver Police Department, and our statistics were that 99% of children that came into conflict with the law were either in the long-term care of the ministry or were still in the care of the ministry. So kids that stay home stay out of trouble.
So the fact that you mentioned the Indian Act, I think, is very significant, considering that in the majority of other places where there is truth and reconciliation, the government stops the harm before there is a truth and reconciliation practice. And it has happened in other countries and in other areas. However, in Canada, the harm has not stopped. At the same time that we have a document that says that the government will honor the dignity and identity of Indigenous people, but yet still maintains a document that considers us inferior to. Any care to comment on that?
It just goes to show Canada is not committed to truth and reconciliation. And I can't say enough about the fact that for 139 years, we've only voted for two governments, conservative or liberal. and it's the same old, you know what, different day. There's a third party out there, and I don't know why people don't consider the New Democratic Party as a, because at least in British Columbia, we're demonstrating we're on people's side. We're on Indigenous people's side. We're on the side of ordinary working person. We're not on the side of the top 1%. And we need to change our thinking about that. We've got to stop doing the same thing over and over and over, expecting a different result.
So in terms of Indigenous communities moving forward, wanting to be able to avoid the same performative UNDRIP tactics that we're seeing, that ultimately say that Indigenous people are the priority, but yet we're not seeing anything really different. So in terms of the UNDRIP, what would you say to communities in terms of unity?
You know, much like when we came together as the Native Alliance for Red Power, it was a consequence of economic and racial oppression. And things haven't really changed that much. We still need to come together and compel governments to do the right thing. And actually, this, it was through the Vancouver Indian Center that my husband and I met. Actually, it was first through a book my sister wrote, Lee Miracle, Bobby Lee, Indian Rebel. There was a bank of pictures in there he kept looking at. He still never read the book, but and then it was through he got invited to sit on the board of directors of the Vancouver Indian Center, of which I was a board member of, and we met there. This organization, the Indian Center has always been the hub of the community, particularly in the urban centers, and could become, you know, the vehicle by which bringing people together to continue to make change in the provinces. I also did contract work in Shoal Lake 39, which straddles both Ontario and Manitoba, and I was just absolutely elated when Wob Canoe got elected, because we remember when he was just a little pencil neck kid, and he asked us, what does it take to become a good leader? And we told him two things. One is love the land, love the people. And number two is you can't be sovereign if you're still a slave to drugs and alcohol. And really, when I look back at Native Alliance for Red Power, that's what killed it. We were just so much into our drinking and whatever, we couldn't stay together. So, yeah. I'm just so happy for Manitoba, because working there, people needed to be lifted up because they were so oppressed. Like I stopped shopping in Kenora because they were so racist in the department store. And I told the department store administration, I said, I'm not going to darken your doorway anymore. I'm going to go shop in Winnipeg because I was treated so badly, even dressed the way I'm still dressing because I was, you know, a contractor. But yeah, it wasn't a fun place to work.
No. Just in the interest of time, I have so enjoyed our conversation. I feel like we could learn so much more. I do have one final question. Okay. Okay, so I've just learned. We do have a little bit of extra time. We had a speaker whose flight was not able to bring them here, which is amazing. So we have a little bit more time, which is great. I would like to ask if there are any questions. Yes, perfect. I will bring the mic. I saw one question here and one question over here, so we'll go over here first and they'll come over.
Hi, thank you. Hi, Joan. I know that you were newly elected as MLA for Melanie Mark's space, but in the media, it doesn't identify you in any nation. It just says you're an Indigenous person. I find that an insult because it's another way they're colonizing our identity. So can you share with us what nations you are in your ancestry so we can acknowledge that? And second would be, since you've been sitting in that seat, what have you brought forward on the NDP table through your own identity to try to make change within the legislation?
First of all, my Wyss Aimshin. Aimshin is my traditional name. It comes from my father's from Tsleil-Waututh. My mother is from Cree French from Northern Alberta. My grandfather is Chief Dan George, and his oldest son was my father, Robert George. Mom was, of course, Jean Marguerite France Cruzet, and her dad and mom were Amy and Fermin Cruzet. He did the Tour de France in 1918. So that's my lineage. And so I'm one of the only sitting MLAs that are currently serving in my home territory, the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Musqueam peoples. And I'm just so proud of that. The second question was, oh, what have I done? Well, I can tell you that the house is extremely dysfunctional. And I recall when I had an opportunity to make a statement, and I said, you know, we can agree to disagree across the house. There's no need for the abuse because they're very awful. And so I told our caucus, don't chase cars. And they're going. And I said, let the dogs bark. We have to set a high standard. But what I said in the house was my constituents in this area are very progressive and they deserve honest, because the other side will lie like a rag, and professional behavior. And they need to, we deserve that. We deserve to be having our issues presented in a better way. And it was sometimes really embarrassing because there were children watching from the gallery while we had one MLA swearing the most vile, filthy language. It was horrible. And he later apologized, but how is he going to make it right for those little ears that were up in the gallery? The other thing that we're always doing is how can we move our action plan forward? It's like our blueprint. And that's why we always, we don't just come up with legislation out of the blue. We always have to be, it's vetted through all of us. It gets vetted through the Leadership Council. It gets vetted through government. And so I participated in that whole process. And as you can appreciate, I'm not just one person in there, you know, fighting a lone battle. I have an amazing team of other members of the Legislative Assembly that are committed to helping us be lifted up with everyone else, because you know what? It just makes economic sense. We've been fighting to be a part of this economy since they arrived, and particularly in the Okanagan, the people that arrived first were the French, and there was a relationship of economic interdependence, and they didn't try to squish us on reserves, and it was only when the English came along that all that nonsense started to happen. And we actually, in the 1860s, threatened to go to war. And we were actually waiting for Chief Joseph to arrive, and we were going to go to war. Well, he didn't make it. He got caught 40 miles south of us in Washington State. So there's that. We work as a team, and we've been plugging away at passing legislation that help lift people up, that provide more homes for people, our peeps in the downtown east side. And of course, that where we have shared decision-making authority. And we're back to, it's almost like we got set back 10 years when that legislation got trashed. But like I said, we'll keep plugging away one slice at a time, moving the agenda forward.
Hati. Hatik.
Testing.
Hati, Joan, right? Sorensen. So Z, Priscilla, I'm 3/4, Babine, Gitsan, mostly Batsoden. I grew up with my late paternal grandparents, Sarah and Thomas Tate, up in Morristown. And I think my question for you is like, it would be so nice to have public money for the schools used on public education rather than these private schools. That's what I'm rooting for, because I'm really hoping to see programs for Indigenous children or youth so they don't end up missing or murdered. We need some kind of programs. I know there's Anya, there's Head Start, but we need more support system for our families to continue on with their whatever dreams these kids want to follow. My second one is we need overpasses for our wildlife. I know in Oregon, they have it. In some parts of Alberta, there's so much hit and run with our wildlife, bears, I don't know, Bigfoot, but yeah, there's so many hit and runs. So I don't know if the province has the money for that and utilize the public money for public schools, not private. So Snake Hill, yeah.
Thank you. You know, the most fun part of the work that I do is right here in the constituency. So I'm just so pleased to get suggestions on how we can improve services and even the ungulates. I know there are some wildlife overpasses up in the Okanagan, but you're absolutely right. It's such a waste to see those, because when we were going to college, there'd be at least 2 deer dead on the side of the road until they put that ungulate overpass in. And that allows us to, you know, protect our food. Because I still don't like eating too much out of Safeway. So those are a couple of things that I can bring back both to our Minister of Education and the Minister of Transportation and Highways. I'll see what they can't do to help.
Thank you. There's a question here, and then there's one other question from over here, and one more. Okay, then that's the last one, then we'll move on to our next. All right, we'll move on to our.
Thank you. Whoa. Thank you, Scott Clark, Coast Salish, President of the Northwest Indigenous Council, which is a provincial advocacy organization for the off-reserve populations throughout the province of British Columbia, and also a resident of this neighborhood. With the federal government, the provincial government, and the city of Vancouver all adopting the federal government's distinctions-based approach, which excludes the vast majority of the urban off-reserve population from their rights to self-determination in the urban context. As our MLA, will you stand up in the House and demand that UNDRIP apply to all Indigenous peoples, regardless of residency or status, and challenge the distinctions-based approach? This is a very important question because 8 years of federal reconciliation, we see more of our people are homeless, more of our people are dying from opiates, more of our people are being pushed out of schools, more of our people are being put into prisons. Reconciliation should not be killing and harming our people, but that's the pattern over the last 8 years. Thank you.
Thank you.
I can tell you, when I worked here, 55,000 Indigenous peoples lived in the downtown or lived in Greater Vancouver area. So that's a huge number, and they're from all across the country. So you're absolutely right. What I keep telling our colleagues is that the Indian Act doesn't say you can provide services to just those that live on reserve. Why aren't they providing services right here to people that live here? And we can do that. There was I had a lady that was, she was physically challenged. She moved into town from the reserve because she got better services there. And even with the province is even funding homes to be built on reserve. Well, wait a minute. Isn't that Canada's job? Providing, and here we're having to step up to help people stay at home rather than end up floating around in the city homeless, build a house on reserve. Well, I was saying, where's Canada in all this? And I can tell you it's such a battle when you want to step up, you want to do the right thing, and it's almost like we're, well, quite frankly, pissing in the wind, because it's so frustrating. There needs to be more attention brought to those of us that live in the city. Because I lived in Penticton for 25 years, but before that, I was in the downtown east side. And now I'm back in the downtown east side. Where's the beef? You're absolutely right. You know, we need to bring those services to everyone, not just those at home on reserve. So, thank you.
One here and then we'll move on to add to our conversation.
Mari Ulamien, Mari Lamien Joan. Inche Susan Pinyan Tami Puche. Tanicha ui Silva, Taniño que ui Yañez, Tugun Viña del Mar Mapumeo, Inche Epu Pinyan. My given names are Susan Yanes. I am a mother of 2 children of the territory of the Walmapu in South America. My father's name is Silva, my mom's name is Yanes. I was not raised Indigenous. I've learned to be Indigenous in these territories. And I'm reclaiming my ancestral heritage through learning my language and also doing the work as a cultural facilitator, which I was trained with Sis Weiss, Julian Andrew, and also my dear sis Leona Brown here a couple of years ago. And as a cultural facilitator, my question to you is, I've been working with, representatives of these territories, local nations. And I always hear that there's also the difficulty to feel people from these lands to have a face out there. As a person from mixed ancestries from another territory, or uninvited guest, even though I'm Indigenous, what can we do as folks that are not from here? What's your suggestion to further, ingrain that unity between us?
I always say that there's all these issues that we have, it's like a mobile. And it doesn't matter where you start, as long as you start. You can write letters, you can be a part of a group like this, you can attend conferences and find out how can you become involved in Indigenous people's being lifted up. In Canada, or like in the Okanagan Territory, our Okanagan people span the border. And same with here. We were also across the line. That border was artificially zipped across. In the United States, I'm considered a citizen alienated from the United States. I've got my social security number. I can go work down there tomorrow if I wanted to. But you know what? Canada does not recognize our people that come this way. So there's that terrible unequal relationship that Canada has with us. But it doesn't really matter where you start as long as you start somewhere, because it's going to take all of us collectively to help fix what's wrong here.
Hey, Joan, it's me, Norm Leach. So do you really believe that colonized party working within a colonized system is really going to provide justice to Indigenous people, whether they're on or off reserve? Because everything I've learned about colonization and the diabolically brilliant systems that they've created, not only here, but everywhere in the world where they've implemented colonization, that it's ever really going to provide justice for Indigenous people or women or poor people or the land. Wouldn't it be more effective to actually, rather than choose the least colonized or the most Indigenous party, to actually create a party based on Indigenous values and principles and ways of being that are proven over 10,000 years and more to be effective, to be fair, to be sustainable? Because if you look at Indigenous values and principles, we are way more traditional and conservative than the conservatives. We are way more green than the Greens. We are way more progressive than the NDP. And we have a 10,000-year track history of governing all of these lands perfectly well for 10,000 years, whereas the Liberals claim, what, 100? So which would you prefer to do? And the other thing is, I think that if we guarantee that if everyone else, all the voters, help us get our land back, we'll lower their taxes.
Hi.
So build it and we will come. Because you're absolutely right. We have to be masters of our own house. But I can tell you a lot of, one of the barriers is our own colonial thinking. And it's our own, the lateral violence among each other that prevented us in the past from doing that, because there was a move to do that, but it fell apart. So I think we're getting to a place where that wouldn't happen again. And we could create a party. Absolutely.
Thank you all for your questions. We're going to take one more question from the Zoom, and then I'm going to invite the executive director of the Vancouver, or Metro Vancouver. Oh, I don't want to get this wrong now. All of a sudden, I've said it a billion times, and now that I have the mic, Metro Vancouver Aboriginal Executive Council. Okay. Okay, and Ginger Gosnell, we'll add them to the conversation. Yes, we'll add Ginger and Michelle to the conversation. So we'll go to the Zoom for a question from the Zoom first, and then we'll carry on with our conversation.
Okay, so this question is from Nicole B. How do you work through UNDRIP in regards to the focus being on honoring the nations whose land the municipalities are on, when the majority of urban Indigenous peoples who make up the population are far from their ancestral homes and deserve to be included in all aspects of UNDRIP? How do you persuade and stress the importance to the municipalities as they are creating the documents that will most likely be set in stone?
That's part of the conundrum that we're in. There are some issues that are federal issues. There's some issues that are provincial, some issues that are municipal, and some. So we're having to navigate and do the right thing from our side. And what I do is I always write letters to those jurisdictions compelling them to do the right thing without telling them what to do. And yet it's a real challenge, because there's sometimes the city isn't so bad, but sometimes they're just not helpful. So I can't tell them what to do, but it's a real minefield having to navigate the different jurisdictions and still do the right thing.
Thanks everyone for your questions and your comments. And thank you so much, Joan.